Welcome to the panel room, everyone. We've got a show for you here about crowdfunding, an introduction panel for you. But before we start, I want to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves. We'll go ahead and start with you, Ron.
Oh, okay. I'm Ron Garner. I ran a small press called Silence in the Library Publishing. I'm not currently publishing right now, but we, during my time doing that, we ran many Kickstarters and had many successes. Learned a lot of things, had a lot of great projects, worked with a lot of great people. I am a United States Marine. I just left active duty and currently work for the Space Force.
Great. Nicole.
I'm Nicole Kurtz, and I'm the publisher for Mocha Memoirs Press. We recently concluded our Indiegogo campaign in May for Slay, Stories of the Vampire Noir. We also have done GoFundMes, and I monitor or run a Patreon page as well.
All right, great. Joshua.
I'm Joshua Palmatier. I'm a fantasy author with Doll Books, but I'm on here because I created a small press called Zombies Need Brains, and we use Kickstarters to fund all of our anthologies. They're all themed science fiction fantasy anthologies, and we have a Kickstarter going on right now, 3 more this year. If you want to check it out, look up tinyurl.com/ZNBDeity. DEITY.
All right, great. And finally, Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex Shvartsman. I run UFO Publishing, and we produce an annual anthology of humorous science fiction and fantasy called Unidentified Funny Objects. Every volume of this book is Kickstarted. We also have done a number of other Kickstarters, and I also currently edit a quarterly magazine called Future Science Fiction Digest, which focuses on fiction from outside the Anglosphere.
All right. Great. And so I'll go ahead and start with you, Nicole. My first question. When did you first decide to try crowdfunding, and why?
So for the last, Mocha Memoirs has been in publication since 2010. And so we have about 8 to 12 anthologies, and I've always funded them out of pocket. And one of the things I wanted to do this time with Slay was pay a professional level rate, the Horror Writers of America professional level rate to my authors. And so in order to do that, we needed, after I did a lot of budgeting and work, I knew that we needed a significant amount of funds or a certain amount of funds up front to be able to do that. And so the project was really important to me. And it was also really important for me to be able to pay authors at a professional rate. So that's kind of what kind of initiated the, okay, let me look into crowdfunding to see if we can, capture this and be able to fund this one-of-a-kind anthology.
Okay, and before you crowdfunded, how would you normally have funded them? Because you said you needed upfront money to pay them without crowdfunding.
Right. I always pay authors like 30 to 45 days after publication for anthology work. Over time, initially when we first started with the initial anthologies, we were only paying very small amounts of funds, and I would pay out of pocket, and like those monies came from whatever profit the press generated or whatever personal money I invested into the company. And so through the years, that money increased in terms of what we could pay authors and editors and cover artists and formatters and proofreaders, to the point where like the Sherlock Holmes anthologies that we did were very popular, very successful. They kind of paid for themselves after a while. And so for this time, I wanted something a little more substantial to be able to give back to authors, because this anthology was very important to me. So traditionally, I would just pay for them with the funds from the press, because the press is publishing them. It's another publication that we're putting out.
All right, great. Joshua, how about yourself?
Well, I got into the whole editing business through DAW. I pitched a couple anthology ideas to DAW through Techno, and so I'd already edited a couple anthologies. And then when there was a big upset in the industry and the publishing companies had to cut back, DAW more or less killed their anthology line. They used to put out like 6 to 8, and now they're putting out like 1 or 2 a year. So at that point I was like, okay, how can I keep doing this? And so in order to keep editing anthologies and putting out the stories from people that I love, I said, I can't do upfront money because I was already paying people professional rates because of the whole through DAW thing. So how can I do this? And the only option at the time seemed to be through some kind of crowdfunding. So I looked at all the platforms that were available at the time. So basically it was something that I got kind of hooked into, and I sat back and said, I've got to figure out a way to do this on my own so I'm not relying on somebody else. It seemed like crowdfunding was the best option. Part of the decision process there was, I figured if I put out an anthology theme idea through Kickstarter and it didn't fund, then that meant that that idea wasn't strong enough to be profitable in the long run anyway. So I was like, okay, that idea must have sucked, and so I'll move on to something else. And so the Kickstarter had that advantage that, I wasn't going to be necessarily putting out anthologies that I thought would be, successful or whatever. But running it through Kickstarter kind of guaranteed that, there was an audience for it. It wasn't just something I thought myself was interesting. So yeah, the crowdfunding just seemed like the best option for getting all of that upfront money, because it's not, it's not just paying the authors a professional rate. Like Nicole said, you've got to pay the artists, and you got to pay, your editors, and et cetera. There's a lot of behind the scenes kind of expenses that go into producing an anthology that people don't think about.
All right, thank you. Alex, what about yourself?
So as Joshua pointed out, you want this as a proof of concept, right? I was frustrated with how few of the professional paying magazines and anthologies were soliciting or buying humorous stories. I thought that there were a lot more people interested in reading them than the amount of material that was getting out there. And so I decided to do an anthology of those, and I was willing to fund it out of pocket, but I also thought that I had some experience with Kickstarter from my day job and from my past life. So I figured I would just apply that knowledge to this new industry, new to me industry, and try to figure it out. And if people weren't willing to pitch in whatever like small amount of money we asked for at the time, $5,000-$7,000, whatever it was for that first campaign, then the book probably didn't have a commercial future. So we funded to the tune of like 200 or 250%, and the book did very well and became an annual series, and we're on number 8 now.
Very great. And you mentioned your previous experience. Could you expand on that a little bit?
So I come from the gaming industry, and I've been involved tangentially in a number of Kickstarter projects where I was just helping out my friends who were setting up the campaigns very early on when Kickstarter was just a baby platform. And so I kind of learned a lot to the point where I was actually doing consulting for money for some of the other campaigns to help them set up their campaigns and run them and promote them. And so a lot of that experience, surprisingly, doesn't apply directly to our industry, even though in the gaming industry, they need sometimes $250,000 for the campaign to get the board game out and produced. And we only need $10,000, $20,000 to do a book. But they're so different in their approaches. In the gaming industry, it's all about the extras. The people who back the campaigns expect to get better value for their money than when the game comes out in retail. They expect all sorts of unique items, like promotional cards, whatever it is. So they want to turn a profit. They want to feel like they got more for their money than they would have if they bought the game in the store. With books, it's the complete opposite. With books, people are supporting the creation. It's more of an NPR model where they're getting a slightly worse value for their money than if they buy the book when it's published. But they're willing to do that because they know they're participating in this really cool thing that wouldn't happen without their support. So as you can imagine, I enjoy working in this industry more, even though less money is involved.
All right, great, thank you. Ron?
Yeah, I think my story is probably similar to everybody else's. I mean, ultimately, I didn't want to pay money out of pocket up front. But I think, so I came to the publishing thing in a kind of weird sort of way anyway. I knew Michael Stackpole and I knew Aaron Alston, and they were doing this anthology at Origins that they do every year. And Michael came to me one year and he said, hey, this anthology I think is really good. I want to get it out to a wider audience. I think you'd be good at this publishing thing. Can you figure out a way to get this thing out to a wider audience? And I thought it was an interesting, problem to solve, right? And I'd been watching the crowdfunding thing for a while for a couple of reasons. The main one being, I've got this weird background, right? I've got an undergraduate degree in computer science. I've got a law degree. I've got a graduate degree in economics. And so kind of this nexus of all of those things made crowdfunding an interesting social experiment, right? It really is. It's an incredibly interesting social experiment because it's essentially, it's microfinancing, right? The same type of thing that's going on in Africa and the rest of the underdeveloped world right now is exactly what we're doing here, except we're doing it in a very developed world manner, right? And so I found that incredibly interesting. And so I'd been tracking it, and I'd been kind of keeping some of my own statistics in areas that I was particularly interested in, which was publishing of books specifically, because I obviously, like most people, I love books, or most people that we know, I love books. And so I thought, yeah, I'll try this thing. And Kickstarter seemed to be the natural solution, number one, because it involved me not putting out money up front, at least not a significant amount of money. And it allowed me to test some of the theories that I had built and some of the models that I had built based upon the data that I'd been keeping for a couple of years, right? And I'd been tracking, like I tracked Kickstarters that were successful and Kickstarters that failed, and I tried to figure out which variables were common among those that succeeded and which were common among those that failed, and balance those out. And I tried to then design a Kickstarter that took into account all of that information and focused on promoting those variables that I saw common among successful Kickstarters. So, yeah.
And how did that one do?
I did really well. At the time, it was the highest funded prose anthology in Kickstarter history at the time.
Oh, great. Now, the next question kind of bounces off what Ron said. He mentioned that he knew several people, and I'll start with you, Joshua. How important is it to have, I guess, a base of people when you're doing an anthology like you're doing through Kickstarter? Do you need those, I guess, starter people in a sense?
I would say yes. The problem with your first Kickstarter is always, you can't rely on just your family and your friends. You've got to somehow reach a wider audience than that. Because if you're only using your family and your friends, then why just ask them for the money and why run a Kickstarter at all at that point? But so like the hardest Kickstarter that Zombies has run was that very first one, because I sat down ahead of time said, okay, even though I'm a fantasy writer with DAW, I knew that even my fan base wasn't big enough to raise the money that I needed for an anthology. So I had to sit down and ask myself, how can I reach the widest possible base for this Kickstarter? Because your own personal base is probably not going to be wide enough, unless you're like, Stephen King or something like that. So my solution at the time was to do half of the anthology with what I called anchor authors. So they were just authors that, already had their own fan bases. Obviously tried to get authors that, had very large fan bases like Shauna McGuire and whatnot. But at the same time, I didn't want to fill the whole anthology with anchor authors because I've always believed that, it's good to do an open call and try to find new voices. So I didn't want to say this is an anthology with only these authors. So I kind of went half and half. And so I did half of the anthology with these anchors, and the thought being that with 6 or 7 anchor authors and my own fan base with that first Kickstarter, that maybe it would have a chance. And it did succeed. It was grueling to get it to there because it turned out that even that wasn't a wide enough base in order for the Kickstarter to succeed. So I had to figure out new options as I was running the Kickstarter. While I was running the Kickstarter, but now, like with Kickstarter that we just started a short while ago, a couple weeks ago, I have over the years, the small press has actually built up its own fan base. So like I have people that they don't even care what the themes are, that they're going to back the Kickstarter the minute it comes out. So at this point, I'm not relying just on anchor authors and whatnot. At this point, the anchor authors, of course, but I also have the ZNB fans. And so like the first day of the current Kickstarter, we got over 10,000. So, which honestly shocked me. I was considering the times. I figured this would be another grueling Kickstarter, but so I was very surprised by the support that we got. I was very happy about it, of course. Yeah, you when you go into running a Kickstarter, you have to really plan ahead how you're going to reach the audience you want to reach. A lot of pre-planning before you hit that launch button for your crowdfunding. So yeah, big, very, very important question to ask before you even get started.
Thanks so much. Alex, what about you?
So all of us on this panel have 2 huge advantages when it comes to crowdfunding campaigns. Number one is we're anthologists. That means that we do get to invite popular authors to participate in our anthologies. And even the authors who may not necessarily already be successful and popular, if they're involved in the anthology, they will work very hard sometimes to promote it because they want the book to succeed. So we have this army, small army of people for every particular book that we're doing that's helping us out, right? And the second advantage is that we're serial anthologists. We're all doing multiple projects, and so we build that fan base, and all of us will have those kind of regulars that trust our editorial tastes and trust the material that we're putting out. However, a lot of the people who are listening to this panel are probably not planning on doing an anthology. They maybe want to publish their own novel or their own collection or a project where they don't have those advantages. And so I have done several Kickstarters for my own books as well. And I have to say that, first of all, even with all those advantages, the amount of money that you're asking for and receiving is generally a lot humbler than the amount of money that you're asking for and receiving for an anthology. But people should not be discouraged. If you want to crowdfund your book, you don't necessarily already have to be a widely successful author or have a huge audience. You just have to hustle. You have to work very, very hard. You have to approach other writers, other influencers, reviewers, people who will lend you their voice. And so if somebody like Shauna McGuire that Joshua mentioned, if she happened to have read your work and likes it, she may tweet out to her audience, and another blogger or writer will tweet out to their audience, and you're kind of going through these motions day after day throughout the campaign to bring the people together. And yes, you will get some friends and family who will participate as well. I mean, they are kind of the core that you have to start with, because you don't have that other base until it's your second or third or fourth project. But it is doable, and you have to really, really pre-plan, and that's going back again to what Joshua said earlier. What is your plan of action? How will you find those new people that are not friends of yours on Twitter and Facebook, and maybe not friends of your friends on Twitter and Facebook? How do you reach beyond that bubble? And that's really, really hard. And there's some really interesting and creative ways to do it. Conventions, in better times, conventions are one such way, where you can print a lot of promotional material and see people face to face, especially if you have a con that you can go to during your campaign. There's also an opportunity to reach out. So if you are a novel that you want to kickstart is a murder mystery that's set in the real estate world, then you can reach out to people in the real estate world rather than people in book world who are already used to authors, and reach out anywhere where the fact that you're an author will still be cool. Because we all know writers. We are writers. We hang out with writers. We all know writers. So you want to reach out beyond that and find support from groups that'll say, hey, this person is just like me. This person plays the same game as me. This person goes to the same church as me, whatever. And they also happen to have a book, and that's really cool, and that's something I want to support. So there's all sorts of other ways, but they all involve sweat. The worst thing you can possibly do is throw up the campaign up on the Kickstarter or an Indiegogo page, and then just expect that the people will come. It doesn't work that way.
So it's not like that old, what was it, late night, set it and forget it guy that, put the thing in the oven, leave it, you're done.
Unless you're Kickstartering a potato salad, if you remember that.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
All right. Ron, what about you?
So I think that I think you're probably going to hear pretty much the same thing from me that you heard from Joshua and from Alex, because these things are pretty universally true, and we've all come to the same conclusion based upon our experience, right? You got to plan the heck out of things, and you got to hustle. And it really comes down to those two things. If you don't do those two things, if you do those two things, you may or may not be successful. If you don't do those two things, you're almost guaranteeing that you're not going to be successful, right? Unless you are selling potato salad. But it's when I say plan, I mean you got to plan everything ahead of time. Not just how you're going to get the word out, but you got to have a true understanding of what your budget's going to be, what things are going to cost you to make this thing happen, because you can be very successful and not be very successful, right? Like you can sell a lot of books and have totally misunderstood what your cost was going to be and wind up losing money. So you got to plan everything ahead of time. And you got to, even when you're running a Kickstarter for an anthology, and Alex is absolutely right, you've got a built-in advantage there in that you've got more voices who have their own network to spread the word. But even then, you got to hustle, because you got to make sure that they hustle, right? It's one of the things that I've found on many of our Kickstarters is that, interestingly, and I guess this shouldn't be a surprise, is that sometimes the people with the biggest networks are not the ones who bring in the most people to you, because they're not out there hustling the way that the folks who don't have those big networks are out there hustling, right? So you gotta understand, particularly in an anthology, you have to understand the personalities of the people that you're working with and how to help them be as big a help to the project as they can be, so that you can all be successful, right? It's a lot of balancing of personalities, but you know, publishing's a lot of balancing of personalities, right?
Definitely. Nick, I'm sorry? Oh, thought someone was saying. Nicole, do you have something you would like to add to the discussion on that?
Know what your shipping costs are. Because
Nope.
May have frozen again there. So that was going to actually lead into my next.
that seems to be.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, just like me, my internet is unstable. So tonight, this is what happens when you live in the boonies in South Carolina. But yes, so I said shipping costs, and I agree with Ron and Joshua and Alex. Know what because I did Indiegogo, so know what your incentives are, and know like how much they weigh. Because initially I wanted to have really nice items to put up, but they're heavy and expensive to ship. And I did not want to keep adding that cost to my bottom line, right? So just be very detailed in your budget and be very, very attentive to your campaign.
And when you figure out what you think your budget is, you need to add a couple $1,000s to it just in case.
For other stuff, right?
For the things you haven't thought of.
Yep.
All right, so starting with Alex now, there are also, we've kind of touched on it before we started recording, there are basically two forms of crowdfunding right now. We've got Kickstarter type, Indiegogo, all of those, which are one-time deals. But we also have the option now as creators of something like Patreon. Do you want to discuss the benefits of that?
Sure. So Patreon is better if you are constantly producing a project. So for example, for me, when I do anthologies, it is a no-brainer. I will always go with Kickstarter if I need the funding for it, if I don't have a budget from a publisher or something. But for my magazine, the Patreon becomes a much better proposition because this is something that we're putting out every 3 months. It's a consistent project, and we want to know how much money we have per issue. We want to know how much material we can buy, and we want to know that we have a steady, reliable base and not all or nothing situation like Kickstarter. So for that, Patreon becomes really good because it's essentially a subscription model. It provides the technology to for people to kick in whatever it is they want to kick in. If it's $1 a month or $3 a month, we're not talking about large amounts of money. We're not talking about an average ticket being $20 to $40 the way that it is with most Kickstarter campaigns. We're talking about small amounts of money that are trickling in, and people are supporting multiple artists. And the reason Patreon is such a good platform for that, because of course you can set up a subscription through any number of other websites or any number of other technological platforms. But the reason Patreon is so good for that is because that is where the people who like to read are. They're already supporting other artists. They're already supporting other writers, other magazines on Patreon. And so for them, it's a matter of just managing their budget. And if they're going to spend $20 a month, and they will give $1 to me and $5 to Joshua and $4 to Nicole, they can just spread that love around. And if we're all doing our job right, then maybe that budget will grow for them from $20 to $25. And sort of like they'll steadily support a lot of artists that way in small amounts. So that's why that platform is really important. I will not pretend to really understand Patreon. My Patreon is still really tiny. We're raising a little under $100 a month right now. So this is not, these are baby steps. We set it up less than a year ago, and frankly, I will be the first to admit that I have not worked very hard. It's just there. I mention it at the, at the editorial of every issue. I link to it, and it's there. But I haven't pushed it the way that I've pushed Kickstarter, because again, my attitude toward it is I need steady, rock steady people that are willing to just keep giving me that $1 to $3 a month in large numbers, rather than finding, one rich patron who will give me $100. And it's a good, slow, steady way to build that. And if I knew how to build it a little bit faster without spending all my time on it, I probably would. But maybe somebody on this panel will have a better idea about it.
All right, thank you. Now, Ron, I didn't ask you, do you have a Patreon? Because I know Nicole and Joshua do.
I don't, and I've never used Patreon. I would say there's actually, in the crowdfunding world, there's actually two major types of crowdfunding, right? What we do is reward-based crowdfunding. And I look at Patreon as kind of a subset of that. It's a weird subset, right? Because it's kind of morphed the playing field a little bit, and so I find that interesting. The other type of crowdfunding, which none of us are ever going to use because it's primarily it's very capital intensive, and it's kind of meant for projects that are going to obviously produce a return to someone other than the publisher or the writer or whatever, is equity-based crowdfunding, right? And you see that a lot in angel investing sites, and there are some real estate crowdfunding sites where real estate developers will go out and do essentially the same type of thing that we do for crowdfunding for a book or something like that, right? Except that the people who give them money are then investors and get some return on that investment. But Patreon, I am, like Alex, excited to hear what everybody else on this panel has to say, because I know absolutely nothing.
All right, so we'll go to you, Nicole, and kind of also give a little bit about the different tiers, because I know, like Kickstarter, there are different levels, and like Alex said, you start at $1 and move up, and different people do different things for those. So what do you like to do on yours?
So my Patreon is for me as an author. And so I have tiers at, one that I think is accessible to everyone, which is like $1. And then I have like a $3, a $5, and a $10. And I think I have like a $25 one, but no one ever uses that one. And so each tier, though, of course, builds on the other one. So if you get the $3 tier, then you get everything the $1 people get, plus the new things for the new incentives that come with paying $3 a month. And so one of the things I like about Patreon is that I get to be a lot more intimate in terms of like communication with the people who donate money to me every month, and because we're building that relationship over time. And I think that's what Alex kind of hinted at as well, is that you have this ongoing community. It's like a newsletter, but not with benefits, I guess, because it's a subscription every month. And so you're able to do lots of different things that you can't do with a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo or one-shot crowdfunding thing. My husband subscribes to a lot of patrons, and he takes his $40 a month and he spreads it out over various artists. His are either comic book artists or musicians, mostly musicians, and they do things like private concerts. And so I think Patreon allows you to be a lot closer to your reader, a lot closer to your subscriber base than a large Kickstarter or Indiegogo would be. And so I think it's a different audience that you're looking for in terms of like versus Patreon versus an Indiegogo, because your patrons are a lot closer to you. They're more than perhaps your Indiegogo crowd would be or your Kickstarter crowd would be. Not that there won't be overlap, because there will be overlap. If they love Ron, they're going to give to his Indiegogo, they're going to give to his Kickstarter, they're going to do his Patreon. Those are the super fans. But I definitely think that your approach is very different in terms of what you give to, and it requires more work, actually, I think, to my Patreon. Alex, I don't know if it's more work for you, but there's a lot of front-loading work with a campaign like Indiegogo or Kickstarter, but once you do it, it's done. That is not the case with Patreon, because it's every single month. And you have to kind of continue to invent ways to make your patrons feel special and give them exclusive. In much the same way, Alex, you were mentioning earlier about gamers. My husband is also a gamer, and like Games Done Quick is doing their thing right now where they're generating like money for charity, which is like this huge, basically it's a huge crowdfunder, right? And so, but the things that the incentives to get people to donate, and the incentives are bigger and better every time they do it. And I feel like Patreon is kind of that way as well. Every month you have to kind of, or every 6 months or every 3 months, to continue to make your patrons feel like it's valuable, you have to continue to give them different things. So it's a little bit more work on a more monthly basis than say a big project that's a one shot.
And I think that also brings those people, like you were saying, because it's more intimate, then they become that group for your next,
they can be, yep,
Kickstarter. So, all right, Joshua, how about you? What are some of your tiers? I know yours is Zombie Needs Brains. I don't know, do you have a personal one as well, or?
Well, my Patreon is combined. So I have the first couple tiers are basically oriented towards the Zombies Need Brains crowd, and the higher tiers are oriented toward my writing fan base crowd, because I'm smart enough to know that the Zombies crowd is bigger than the Joshua Palmatier fan base crowd. So that's what most people are interested in, and mostly it's targeting just writers in general, because Zombies does the open call for submissions. So there's the basic, just $1 support tier, and they get access to some of the bonus stuff that I put out every now and then. The real first tier, where you get some like exclusives, so to speak, is the $3 tier. That's the Zombies tier, where I give like behind the scenes little details about the small press. I give the patrons for that level like advance notice of what the themes are, advance looks at like the cover art and the cover copy, so they get to see things ahead of time, usually a month or two ahead of time before I announce it to everybody else. So it's kind of like Nicole said, it's a little more intimate, because it's kind of like they're getting a sneak peek behind the scenes of how Zombies is run, and what's coming up. And then the other two tiers, well, there's 3 tiers, but like Nicole said, the $25 tier, nobody really takes one. I have like a $6 tier. That one's for writers as well. Basically, it's me giving writer advice, writer tips, things like that. And sometimes I give like commentary about the publishing world. Like when the pandemic hit, I was doing like little sort of blog articles about how I saw the publishing world changing from behind the scenes because of it. So not just writer tips, but just publishing, what I'm seeing in the publishing world happening as well. And the $10 tier is for the super fans that want to know more about my personal writing. So I give them like snippets of projects that I'm working on and just talk about. So they usually get to see like the first, yay many chapters of the book that I'm writing right now, or, stuff like that. So they get a little advanced look at things as well. And then, like I said, I have a $25 tier. That's after 4 months at the $25 tier, I will critique a short story that you've written, or a chapter. Nobody really takes that one though. Most of the people on Patreon, like Alex said, they got a certain amount of budget for Patreon, and they like to spread it out as far as they can. So yeah, it's rare that you get those higher level tier patrons to back it. And the incentive for all of the tiers is that I will write a short story for everybody, you know, every 3 or 4 months, something like that. And it's a story that's never been published. And so everybody gets to see it first, and then I wait, you know, a couple months after they've seen it, and I usually put it out myself to the general public. So so the funds that I from the Patreon are basically my quote unquote payment for these short stories. And I mean, I wanted to start getting more short stories of my own as well. You know, and a lot of other people's short stories, and you know, that urge to write short stories of my own, you know, hit pretty hard for that. So this was my way of getting them out there, finding an audience for them.
So that's interesting. So I just ask you a question, because again, I know nothing about Patreon, but I'm listening to you guys talk, and it's there's two things that strike me. Number one, sounds like Patreon takes a lot more effort over time, which makes it sound like, if you're looking strictly at the funds that you receive from Patreon, makes it sound like perhaps the ROI, the return on investment, is lower. But that's the first thing. But the second thing makes me think that part of the ROI comes not from Patreon itself, but from the interaction between Patreon and the other things that you may have going on, whether they be Kickstarters or other things that you're publishing in other ways, and that is that added value perhaps increases that ROI so that it makes it worth it.
Yes. Because you're building super fans, right? And so that's kind of one of the things. Your mailing list, your newsletter list also has people on it, but they kind of lurk, and they get access to things too that are kind of a newsletter exclusive as well. But for people who are actually willing to put money in your pocket every month, whether that's $1 or $25 or what have you, those people are really interested in the product that you're producing. They're interested in you as an author, or you as a musician, or you as a creative. And I think they should be kind of cradled. But they also, if you could, and they tell other people. Like I had a new novella out, and so I sent these very special, like RPG styled stickers to packs of 6 to all my Patreons. And you with grown folks were so happy to get these beautiful, colorful stickers. And they're the only ones that have them. It's a Patreon exclusive. And so only people who are my Patreon get them, and they loved it. First mail, okay. And 2, they got them in these really nice kind of world market styled envelopes and handwritten letters from me, thanking them for the Patreon, you know, for donating and continue to support me through this challenging time. And then here's something that no one else has. Yeah. And I'm a high school teacher by training. People love stickers. And so they were incredibly happy to get these. And did it cost me funds? Yes. But did it cost me more funds than I generate from that Patreon, for my Patreon a month? No. So I didn't lose anything. And I have reached out and tried to solidify, right? Those attachments. So it's definitely worth it.
So I agree with everything you guys said, but my approach is actually slightly different. And it could be, I could very well be wrong. My approach to Patreon has been from the beginning not to allow it to take too much of my time. So I've structured all of the rewards and everything else in a way that, you know, I don't have to spend more than an hour a month on it. Most of the rewards are subscriptions, whether digital or print, to the magazine. Different higher tiers provide other ebooks, you know, digital books or physical books that need to be mailed out occasionally. Doesn't take a lot of time. But beyond that, I do a monthly update, usually at the beginning of the month, not necessarily on the first of the month, but early on. And in that update is where I communicate with the backers, and I give them all sorts of these exclusive snippets. I'll tell them about the stories that we bought for the magazine, or what anthologies I'm working on, what projects are going on. I will give them previews of the covers, of the cover art that is not available anywhere else at that time. But none of it takes a lot of time. So again, like I dedicate about 30 minutes a month to that, and about 30 minutes a month to fulfilling any kind of rewards that are not automated. And maybe that's why it's been growing pretty slowly. Maybe I need to be more personal, but I also know that I just don't have enough time. And if I have to spend more time on it, I would have to bring in another person, and that person's remuneration would be more than what we're bringing in. So I have to kind of accept that that's going to be a challenge, and limit myself. Otherwise, I'm not editing and writing and translating and doing all the fun things that people are coming to the Patreon to support in the first place.
I do it in chunks. So I sit, like if I have a block of time, and I have it in my, if I have like a 2-hour block, I might sit down in those 2 hours and kick out 5 or 6 blogs that I will like post and go ahead and upload and preset to release over the next 6 months. So I don't labor over it every single month. It takes like 20 hours or anything like that. No. Because I have a full-time job too. And I'm a mom and, all these other things. So what I do is when I have significant chunks of time, and I do carve out time on my personal calendar, this is the day that I'm going to write Patreon stuff. So I'm actually ahead. I try to stay ahead. And so that if one month I don't have any time to write new creative stuff that month for Patreon, I already know that new creative stuff will post. So that's kind of, and I did that before I made my Patreon live. I went ahead and just uploaded a bunch of things that I thought would be great around monthly themes, around books I think I knew were going to come out, what have you, so that I don't have that monthly stress of where I need, it's the 30th, I got to get my Patreon stuff out, so that's what I did. And that's what I continue to do, try to stay ahead. So it doesn't take so much labor, but it does take, just like with a bigger crowdfunding thing, you do have to plan, and be proactive and be consistent in what you're doing. And that's what I try to do.
How about you, Joshua? Does it take a lot of time for you on a monthly basis, or?
No, I specifically designed it so that it would not suck up a lot of time, because I also have a day job. I teach mathematics at a college. So yeah, I'm very aware of the time limit. The monthly aspects of it, like the little articles and blogs or whatever you want to call them that I send out, those don't take me very much time at all. Like Alex said, I try to do plan it so that it only takes me like an hour, maybe 2 hours a month to get all of that stuff done and ready to go. The biggest time suck is for me is when I want to give them a short story I've written, and then I got to write a short story. And for me, I mean, that's a week-long endeavor, because I got to have the idea and then I got to write it out. And it takes me a while to write out short stories. So that's the biggest thing that sucks up a lot of time for me, is the short stories. But one of the reasons I set up the Patreon in the first place is I wanted to kind of force myself to write more short stories. So it's kind of the incentive. And right now, like Alex, I wouldn't say my Patreon is pulling in tons of money. It's set up that if I start getting a ton of money a month, then I have to produce a story a month. If that happens, then there might be some issues with time. But right now, I'm only posting a new short story of mine like once every 3 or 4 months. So that's plenty of time for me to the short story in between teaching and writing my own novels.
And you were saying also that your short story, then a couple months later, you'll try to sell it anyway, so you would still get
a couple months later, if nobody's interested in it, I'll just release it on my own. So yeah, and I mean, my stories at this point, my short stories don't. So the Patreon is like I said, is sort of generating my quote unquote pay.
All right, thank you.
Keeping me active.
All right, now, as Alex mentioned, time is a big, important part. of your writing life, obviously. So I'll start with you, Ron. Going back to Kickstarters or Indiegogo, we use Kickstarter now like people use, Kleenex for tissue. What, on a typical campaign, what is the impact and how can you, I guess, lessen it on your normal business for the writing?
Oh, I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I obsess about campaigns, right? I had a hard time when I was doing them separating myself. I'd find myself, and I had a day job, and I'd find myself at work, stepping out of the secure facility to, go out on my phone and pull up the Kickstarter and find out where we were and if there was something going on. And I thought that I had, so I did an obscene amount of planning for every Kickstarter that I ran, right? Like, I think I probably spent more time planning Kickstarters than I did running Kickstarters. And so what I would do, one of the things that I would do when I was planning a Kickstarter is that after the first couple, I kind of had a feel, I thought, for the way, and after watching several other people's Kickstarters, I kind of had a feel for timing, I thought. And so I would make lists of people that I knew, buttons that I knew that I could push, right? People I knew that I could reach out to give us a push when it felt like we needed a push. And because of that, I felt like I needed to always have my finger on the pulse, right? And so I was always watching and I was always checking, and I'd check, and if I felt like it was the time to pull the trigger on one of those, then I'd call or email somebody and say, hey, you agreed to send this message out for me promoting this. Would you mind doing that as soon as you can? And then go back to work, right? So during Kickstarters, I spent an obscene amount of time doing it. So I'm probably the wrong person to ask that, because I do tend to, when I have a project going, and it's not just Kickstarters, but life in general, when I have a project going, I obsess on that project and it becomes the center of everything, and everything else kind of falls away. So I'm not very good at time management for anything else when I'm focused on one thing.
Well, the passion is what you need, right?
Yeah.
Nicole, how about yourself? How do you do with the balance?
I don't. So like during my GoFundMe and during my Indiegogo, all I did was bug people and push for those things. Like I didn't write during that time. Like I just didn't. Um, that's all I did. I was like Ron. I was like on Twitter and I was looking at numbers and at lunch breaks and in between on other breaks. And so I don't. So because like Ron was saying, one of the things that so I work with a lot of and know a lot of independent comic book writers. And that's a big, huge, I don't know if any of you guys know this, but Black speculative fiction and comic books is enormous and huge. And there are tons of Kickstarters and crowdfundings like all the time for these amazing comics. So the thing about them though is that I watch them and how they do things, and one of the things is that they're always very visual and brilliantly illustrated. But the thing is, they're always pimping them. They're always like shoving them in your face, going, "Remember this?" In much nicer ways, of course. So for my GoFundMe and for my Indiegogo, I spent a lot of time not really doing much of anything else. Like I'm up at 2 a.m. I'm up at 4 trying to make sure that, oh my God, it dipped in, just trying to find new ways to get it out there. And I was not, my Indiegogo was my first one. So I wasn't like incredibly planned out. So I learned a lot from that. But yeah, I didn't do anything else during that time. I didn't even really eat or sleep. I was so just consumed with trying to make sure that it funded.
All right, Joshua.
I would say that the first 3 or 4 that I ran, I was like that, where I was obsessed, and watching it constantly, and like they said, you are constantly asking yourself, what have I forgotten? Who have I forgotten to bug? Who else can get this out there? What big names do I know on Twitter that might mention it? What websites or blogs might mention it? Et cetera, et cetera. It's just constant. You're just constantly thinking about that. The last many of them, probably 3 or 4 of them, I've managed to settle down about that a little bit, or maybe gotten just a little more control over it, because I still do it. I've been doing it during this whole panel in my back of my head, going, okay, who do I need to ask next? But I now can do like my mornings now, like in the morning I get up, I check the Kickstarter, then I go do stuff for my math teaching job, right? And then, I take a break at lunch and I check the Kickstarter, and then I go do my writing. And then after I my set time for writing, then I check the Kickstarter. And, so I've learned how to organize everything so that I feel like still keeping up on the Kickstarter and not letting that slide. But at the same time, I'm still being productive in my other jobs, especially the bill-paying job. So it like I said, it took a couple years to figure out how to do that, because I was like Nicole with the first couple. I literally everything shut down for that month that I was running the Kickstarter, and all I did was the Kickstarter. And then I realized I can't do that. For just my writing, taking a month off of the writing is not good, because it takes you another month to get back into whatever project you were on after that. So, I realized I couldn't do it. So I figured out how to organize it, basically.
Okay, Alex.
So I figured out that once all the prep work has been done, and there's a lot of prep work. I mean, you start preparing for your Kickstarter like months and months ahead of the actual Kickstarter. So once all that prep work is done, other than the first day and the last day, I would say I average about 2 hours a day during the active campaign working on it. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but I too have a day job. And so that 2 hours has to come from somewhere. So I do find that I'm not really writing at all or much during the month that we're running the Kickstarter campaign, and so I try to kind of work my deadlines around it as well. So I'll kind of turn in whatever short stories I owe to editors beforehand, or make sure that I have enough time after the campaign. And I kind of managed to do some translation work during Kickstarters, because you're sort of in a different headspace for that, and I can pick up and go a lot more readily than with my own actual writing, so I can do it in shorter bursts. So I really try to reshuffle a lot of the different things that I do in order to accommodate the crazy train that's going to be the Kickstarter. And again, the only reason that I could bring it down to those 2 hours a day is that I've been doing it for 2 hours a day probably for 8 weeks before the campaign started. So all of these, the blog posts and reaching out to people and all that stuff that Ron and Josh and Nicole have been talking about, as much of it as I can do before the campaign actually launches, I get done.
I will say that one of the things that Alex just said brought this to mind, and that's the thing that I learned specifically was that I could manage to not be obsessed with it in the trench. And when I say in the trench, what I mean is you're gonna, if you are a successful Kickstarter, your Kickstarter funding curve is gonna look like this, right? You're gonna get a lot of people at the beginning, and then you're gonna get a few people contributing throughout, and then you're gonna get a lot of people at the end, right? And those two bumps are where you get most of your people. Now, we've managed to have Kickstarters where, like, we had one where we had a lot of people at the beginning, and then the Jezebel put out an article about our Kickstarter, and we got this huge bump in the middle, right? And then we had a lot of people at the end. So it was kind of a W, which was really nice. But in general, that's what you're going to get. And once you learn to accept that the trench is real and that it's there and that you're going to be in it, I think you become a lot more comfortable with it.
Yes, I'm in the lull. I call it the lull. I'm in the lull right now. Yeah. And it's heartbreaking, but I know it's there. And so.
So from hearing from all of you, it seems like running a crowdfunding campaign is hell. So why do it? And I'll start with you, Nicole.
Oh, I did it because I had, I did it for a lot of reasons. One, I needed financial backing, and this was a great way of getting it. Two, I had a product that I thought that I was passionate about and felt that needed to be out there for consumers and that consumers would enjoy. And three, I did crowdfunding because it also gave me an opportunity to collaborate with other artists. Two, to kind of like see the fruit, like to expand. Like we had artists do art, different artists do various art to go in as far as prizes for our backers. It became a much more creative process, and it allowed me to collaborate with people outside of my normal artist writer community. So that was really good. So those were three big benefits for me. One, we got financial backing. Two, I'm able to produce a product that I feel quite passionate about and think consumers will enjoy reading. And then it gave me an opportunity to be collaborative with others outside of my normal genre and field. So that was really nice. That's why I did it.
All right, Joshua?
Basically all of Nicole's reasons. I mean, for me, the really big reason was that I did those 2 anthologies for DAW, and I just enjoyed it so much that I had to find a way to make it happen on my own. And so the Kickstarter, yes, it's hell, but it is the only reasonable way for me to get the funds to do it. But it boils down to just the idea that it's a passion. I love trying to find these stories, these great stories. I love trying to put the package together and getting it out there. And it's just something I love to do. And Kickstarter is the only viable option I have to make it happen. So yeah, just the passion.
Alex, do you have anything to add?
Sure. I wouldn't say it's hell. I think we all gripe about doing the things that we actually love to do, like writing. And running a Kickstarter campaign is no different in that regard. It's actually a lot of fun. You connect with your fan base very directly. You know exactly who these people are. You know exactly why, for the most part, why they're supporting you and what they want to get out of it. You get feedback from them about the book that you're putting out. It helps you make the next book better. And you're building a community. And I got to tell you, I had to skip a year out of the 8 years that I've been running the UFO campaigns. I had to skip a year for health reasons. And I had a flood of people reach out to me throughout going, where's the Kickstarter campaign? Why is the book not happening this year? What's going on? People want these products. They want these books to come out. They expect us to produce them just like as if they were coming out from a big publisher and they're waiting for that next book in the series from one of their favorite authors. And it's amazing to be a part of that. And crowdfunding is a way for many of us to be able to create things that may not have otherwise existed.
Great. Ron?
Yeah, so everything that everybody just said, I mean, obviously, as a base, that's the majority of it. I really, and we've all of us are anthologists, and so we're kind of speaking about this from an anthologist point of view. but I think ultimately what it goes back to is what Joshua said, and that's passion, right? I don't care if you're an author trying to publish your own work, or you're an anthologist, or you're somebody who created a game. You're passionate about something and you want to get it out there. And that, I think, given the fact that most of us are not independently wealthy, and able to just go out to a vanity press and have it done, I think that, you know, crowdfunding is probably the most obvious viable way to do that for most of us. For me, it was the additional thing was, I love systems. I love understanding systems, and I love being able to break them into their constituent parts, and understand them well enough to make to make the system work for me, right? Like, it's an interesting process for me. And Kickstarter is a system, as is Indiegogo and GoFundMe. And they're systems that generate a lot of data. And they're dynamic systems, so they change all the time, right? Kickstarter today is not what Kickstarter was 10 years ago. It changes, it's changed drastically. And so it's interesting because it's dynamic, but it generates enough data that you can track that change and figure out how it's changed in such a way that you can be successful, right? It generates massive amounts of data. Like, before I did my first Kickstarter, I went out and I pulled up all of the information I could find on every single anthology Kickstarter that had ever been done on Kickstarter, right? And it's all out there forever. So, you know, it's a lot of work, but it's interesting. And it's the kind of interesting that a geek like me likes, right? So yeah, there was that as well. But ultimately, it's about getting to work with good people, getting to put out products that you're passionate about, and getting to make them better because you have the funds available to make them better than you might have otherwise if you were trying to do it without the money up front.
And I want to thank everyone for coming and for watching. Let's go around the table and let everyone know where they can find you. And in your case, Joshua, I'll start with you. Your current Kickstarter again, just to, you know, plug it.
Okay. Well, you can find me and Zombies Need Brains on Facebook, of course, and Twitter. On Twitter, it's at ZNBLLC. And then on Twitter, for my own personal page, it's Ben Tate Author. Don't ask me why. And let's see, we're on Patreon, of course. So just do a search for us on Patreon. And then on Kickstarter, our current campaign is under tinyurl/ZNB Deity, DEITY. So I also have a page on Instagram, but that's more of a personal thing and not really. You can follow me on there if you want, but you're gonna just see pictures of my roof garden mostly.
All right, great.
That's it.
Okay. Alex.
So the easiest way to follow all the various things that I'm doing, because I'm just have too many things going on usually at once, is my website, which is just my name.com, alexshvartsman.com. I'm on Twitter and Facebook as well. We try to communicate more through social media for the magazine. Like we have a special page for it on Facebook called Future SF. And that's usually where I put out all the information about reviews and like accomplishments and like news stories that we acquired and things like that. I don't have a project on Kickstarter right now, but today is a book birthday for a UFO publishing book. So I'm going to plug that real quick, if I may.
Yeah.
Copies right here. And this is a brand new book by Mike Resnick called The Hex is In. And it's a collection of all of the Harry the Book stories, including one that's never been published before, and several that's only been published in the United Kingdom. So unfortunately, Mike passed away earlier this year. So I worked with his estate to edit the book posthumously, and we put a lot of work and effort to make sure that we'll be up to his standards. So hopefully people will enjoy it if they like humorous urban fantasy.
Great. Thank you so much. Ron.
So as I said, I'm not publishing right now, so I don't have anything out there. But what I will say is that I'll take this couple of moments to pimp the other panelists here. If you haven't read anything from Zombies Need Brains, you need to do it. They put out amazing stuff. I remember the first anthology that you had out there on Kickstarter. I looked at the artwork on that, and just the artwork alone, I was like, man, I have got to read this. And it didn't disappoint. And Nicole, I have known Nicole for years, and I've read a bunch of her stuff and published some of her stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never been disappointed by anything that I've read from her. It is always good. And Alex, I haven't read anything yours, but I'm gonna go out now and find it and get it. So I'm excited to do that. So it was great being on this panel with all of you guys.
All right, Nicole.
Let's see. I do have a project out right now. It's called Slay, Stories of the Vampire Noir. It is a collection of 29 stories featuring vampires, hunters, and slayers from the African diaspora. It is available for pre-order. I do have an active GoFundMe for Mocha Memoirs Press. You can just go to GoFundMe and put in Mocha Memoirs Press. You can find us at mochamemoirspress.com and Mocha Memoirs on Twitter and on Facebook.
All right, great. Again, thank you, all of you, for coming in for this panel, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jason.
Bye.
Thank you.
Joining us. See you guys.
Bye.